The streets are eerily empty, the dim orange glow of the streetlights barely cutting through the fog. As I walk, the sound of faint, deliberate footsteps echoes behind me. I turn to find a stray dog trailing at a distance, its black coat blending into the shadows. It's not aggressive, but something about the way it watches me feels calculated. When I stop, so does the dog. Its head tilts slightly, as if studying me. That's when I notice the collar, a thick band of worn leather with the word observer engraved into it. A chill creeps up my spine, but I tell myself it's just a strange coincidence and keep walking. When I glance back again, the dog is gone, replaced by a man in a trench coat standing under the flickering streetlight. He's not moving, not saying anything, just watching. For the next 3 days, I see the dog everywhere. It's sitting outside my apartment in the mornings, pacing near the park where I jog, even waiting by my office building. Every time I try to approach it, it vanishes before I get close, disappearing into alleys or blending into the night. My friends laugh when I tell them, dismissing it as paranoia, but I can't shake the feeling that it's deliberate. One night, after spotting it again near the grocery store, I decide to follow it. The dog doesn't run this time. It leads me, trotting steadily down quiet streets until we reach the edge of town. The road turns to gravel, then to dirt, and finally stops at a crumbling warehouse. The building looms in the moonlight, its windows broken and the metal siding rusted. The dog waits at the entrance, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark before slipping inside. Against my better judgment, I follow. The air inside is damp and thick with the smell of decay. Rows of cages line the walls, each containing animals, dogs, cats, even birds, wearing similar collars, all engraved with single words: tracker, watcher, observer. They stare at me with unnerving focus, their movements almost synchronized. My heart pounds as I step back, the realization dawning that these animals are not just pets, they're tools. A voice comes from the shadows. "You've seen too much now." It's the man in the trench coat. He steps forward, his face gaunt and eyes sunken, as if he hasn't slept in weeks. "These animals," he says, gesturing to the cages, "are part of an observation program. Surveillance without suspicion. And now so are you." I stumble backward, but he blocks the exit. He tells me that I've been selected for a next phase of the program, one that doesn't involve just being observed. He gives me a choice: work with them willingly or face consequences I won't live to understand. My mind races as I nod, agreeing to his terms. I don't know what else to do. When I leave the warehouse, my steps feel heavier, as if I'm being weighed down by invisible chains. The dog is outside, waiting for me again. This time, it doesn't follow, it walks ahead, leading me back home. I've made my choice, but deep down, I know it's far from over. The dog isn't just watching anymore. It's waiting. I had missed my usual bus, and cutting through the alley seemed like the quickest way home. My friends always joked about how creepy it was, but the thrill of saving 10 minutes outweighed my hesitation. Halfway through, the muffled sound of shuffling footsteps echoed behind me. I froze and turned. At the edge of the alley, under the weak glow of a single streetlight, stood a figure in a hoodie. They were perfectly still, their head tilted just slightly as if studying me. For a moment, I thought they might be lost, but then they called my name, not with curiosity, but with authority. "Don't run," the figure said, their voice calm but firm. My legs instinctively moved to leave, but something in their tone pinned me in place. Against every ounce of better judgment, I stopped. Slowly, they stepped forward, the soft glow of the streetlight revealing their face partially obscured by the hood. "Do I know you?" I managed, though my voice trembled. Instead of answering, they pulled out a notebook and flipped through its pages. Each page contained photos of me in places I barely recognized. One was taken at a cafe I'd visited weeks ago, another outside my apartment building late at night. My stomach churned as they stopped on the last page. Today's date written in sharp, black ink. "You've been chosen," they whispered, holding the notebook up so I could see the blank page beneath. I didn't wait for an explanation. I turned and sprinted toward the end of the alley, my breath loud and ragged. The figure didn't chase me. Instead, they stood their ground, flipping another page of the notebook. But as I neared the exit, two more figures emerged from the shadows, blocking my path. Both wore similar hoodies, their faces just as obscured. "Stop," one of them said. "We just need confirmation." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, backing away. My heart raced, and the walls of the narrow alley seemed to close in. The first figure caught up to me, still holding the notebook. Calmly, they closed it and slipped it into their pocket. "It's already decided. You'll know soon enough." They stepped aside, gesturing for me to leave. I didn't wait to be told twice. I bolted past them, ignoring the way their eyes followed me. When I finally reached my apartment, I slammed the door and locked it, my hands trembling. I dropped my keys onto the counter and froze. Inside my wallet, tucked beneath my ID, was a small device I hadn't noticed before. A red light blinked steadily on its surface. I didn't dare touch it. Instead, I sat there, staring as a single thought consumed me. This wasn't a random encounter. The carnival had been closed for years, but its skeleton still loomed at the edge of town. My friends thought it would be fun to explore it one night, a mix of bravado and boredom pushing us to the rustic gates. Under the pale light of the moon, the once bright signs were faded and peeling, the rides frozen mid-motion like forgotten relics. As my friends joked about ghost stories, I drifted away, drawn to a tent hidden behind a crumbling roller coaster. The tent was larger than it seemed from the outside. The fabric sagged, and the air inside was heavy, almost stale. The walls were plastered with newspaper clippings, each detailing a missing person, names I vaguely recognized from old town rumors. My heart thudded in my chest as I traced my fingers over the faded headlines. Each clipping had something in common. The last known location was always here. A faint rustling behind me made my blood turn cold. I spun around to see a clown mask lying on the dirt floor. Its paint was cracked. The grin faded into something sinister. As I backed away, I noticed a faint shadow stretching across the side of the tent. Someone was standing just outside, their silhouette motionless against the fabric. The shadow moved, slow and deliberate, and a man stepped inside. He was wearing an identical clown mask, though this one looked newer. His head tilted slightly, as though he were studying me. "We don't take kindly to trespassers," he said, his voice muffled but firm. I bolted for the exit, but as I stepped into the open air, I realized something was wrong. The laughter and chatter of my friends were gone, replaced by an eerie silence. My breath came in short gasps as I searched for them, calling out their names, but the only response was the soft creak of rusted rides swaying in the breeze. The clown emerged from the tent, this time without the mask. His face was disturbingly ordinary, a man you wouldn't look twice at on the street. That somehow made it worse. He walked toward me with measured steps, his smile never wavering. "You're not the first to come looking for a thrill," he said, his voice calm, almost friendly. "But you might be the last." He gestured behind him, and I froze. My friends were there, tied to the framework of an old carousel, their mouths gagged. The faint hum of a generator kicked on, and the ride groaned to life, spinning slowly. The clown stopped a few feet from me, watching my reaction. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out. "That depends," he replied, his smile growing wider. "Are you willing to play by the rules?" I didn't wait for an explanation. I ran toward the gate, my legs burning, my mind racing with questions I didn't want answered. As I reached the edge of the carnival, I heard his voice echo faintly behind me. "See you soon." The main trail was wide and well-worn, lined with cheerful signs pointing the way to scenic overlooks. But halfway through the hike, I noticed an unmarked path veering off into the woods. It was narrow, overgrown, and led deeper into the forest than seemed necessary. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped off the main trail. The deeper I went, the stranger things became. The trees grew closer together, their branches twisting unnaturally. Discarded objects littered the path. Old shoes, a rusted thermos, even a backpack that looked untouched by time. Carved symbols began to appear on the trees, intricate designs that didn't belong in nature. The air felt heavier, as if I was being swallowed by the forest itself. The trail ended abruptly at a small clearing. In the center stood a single wooden chair, its surface darkened by years of weather. Surrounding it were dozens of shallow holes, some freshly dug, others half-filled. My stomach churned as I realized the dirt had been disturbed recently. The scene felt deliberate, staged. Whatever had been buried there, someone had been back to dig it up. I turned to leave, but a voice stopped me. "You weren't supposed to find this." A man stepped out from the trees, holding a shovel. His clothes were dirty, and his face was pale, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He blocked the path, standing between me and the way back to safety. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to the chair. "See." I froze. "I'm not sitting there." The man sighed, tossing the shovel aside. "That's what they all say," he muttered. "It's protocol. You sit, I ask questions, you leave. Simple." His tone was almost casual, but his posture told a different story. He was ready to stop me if I tried to run. I backed away, shaking my head. "I'm not part of whatever this is." "That's where you're wrong," he said. "You found the trail. That makes you part of it." I glanced at the path behind him, calculating my chances. He saw the look in my eyes and laughed. "Go ahead. Run. But if you leave now, someone else will come to deal with you." That was all the motivation I needed. I darted past him, my feet pounding against the dirt. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I was back on the main trail. The trees seemed to open up again, and the air felt lighter. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When I reached the parking lot, my car was the only one left. I climbed in, locking the doors, and drove away without a second glance. Days later, I couldn't stop thinking about the chair and the holes. I don't know what he was burying or digging up, but I know I wasn't the first to stumble onto that trail. And I doubt I'll be the last. I hadn't planned on stopping, but the GPS had failed me, and the next town was hours away. The motel looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. Faded paint, a flickering neon sign, and a cracked front desk bell. The clerk was a tired-looking man with gray hair, barely glancing up as he handed me an old-fashioned key. "Room 7, he said, his voice flat. "No smoking, no noise after 10. The room smelled of damp wood and stale air. The furniture was mismatched, and the wallpaper was peeling in spots. As I tossed my bag onto the bed, something on the nightstand caught my eye. It was a photograph of me. I was sleeping in what looked like this very bed. My stomach turned as I scanned the room. The windows were shut, the curtains drawn. There was no way someone could have taken that picture, not in the time it had taken me to check in. I grabbed the photo and ran back to the front desk, but the clerk was gone. The lobby was empty, the lights dimmed. A faint hum of static came from a small TV in the corner. When I returned to the room, the photo was gone. In its place was another, a picture of me standing at the front desk moments earlier. My hands shook as I locked the door and double-checked the windows. A knock startled me, sharp and deliberate. When I opened it, a man in a maintenance uniform stood there, holding a toolbox. "You're in the wrong room," he said, his tone calm but insistent. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Just come with me," he said. "It's not safe here." I didn't have much of a choice. He led me down the hall to another room, identical to the first. "Stay here," he said, setting the key on the nightstand. "You don't want to know what happens in the others." Before I could ask anything else, he left, locking the door from the outside. The room was quieter than the last, almost unnaturally so. I sat on the bed, too afraid to sleep, watching the shadows shift under the faint moonlight streaming through the curtains. When morning finally came, I left as quickly as I could. The clerk was back at the desk, acting as though nothing had happened. As I handed him the key, I noticed a padlock on the door to room 7, with a sign that read, "Do not disturb." "What happened to that room?" I asked. The clerk looked at me for the first time, his tired eyes narrowing slightly. "What room?" he replied. I didn't argue. I got into my car and drove away, the motel shrinking in my rearview mirror. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that the key I held wasn't just to a room. It was to something I was never meant to see. And I'll never stop wondering what was behind that locked door. I spotted the wallet on the sidewalk as I was walking home from work. It was simple, black leather, and looked expensive. I picked it up, expecting to find some ID or contact information, but there was none, just cash and a single business card that read, "Return to 14th Street." No name, no phone number, nothing else. It felt odd, but I decided to drop it off anyway. Maybe someone would be waiting. The address led me to a warehouse at the end of a dimly lit street. The building looked abandoned, its windows boarded up, and the heavy metal door was slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment, the air thick with unease, before stepping inside. The interior was dark, save for a circle of flickering candles at the center of the room. A group of people stood in the dim light, their faces obscured by shadows. As soon as they saw me holding the wallet, the murmuring stopped. One of them stepped forward, a tall man in a suit that looked out of place in the grimy setting. His smile was unnervingly calm. "You've brought the final piece," he said, his voice smooth but cold. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You've completed the circle," he replied, ignoring my question. The others began to close in, their movements synchronized, as if rehearsed. My grip on the wallet tightened, and I took a step back. "I just wanted to return this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man laughed softly, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Every act has a cost," he said, "and you've been chosen to pay it." They handed me a folded piece of paper, its edges worn and stained. When I opened it, I saw a list of names, each one crossed out except for the last, mine. My heart raced as I realized this wasn't some random errand. I had been pulled into something much darker. The man explained that the wallet was a test, passed from person to person. Each time, it lured in someone curious or kind enough to return it, only to trap them in this twisted game. "Now," he said, his tone still calm, "you must pass it on. What happens if I don't?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. His smile widened. "Then you stay here, and the circle resets." They thrust a new list into my hands, this one blank, and placed the wallet back in my palm. I was allowed to leave, but as I walked away from the warehouse, I could feel their eyes on me. The wallet felt heavier now, like it carried more than just cash. When I got home, I placed it on my kitchen counter and stared at it for hours. I don't know who I'll pass it to, or if I can live with myself when I do. But I also know I can't go back to that warehouse. Not ever. I managed to find a spot near the window, trying to ignore the cramped space. Halfway Through the journey, the conductor's voice crackled over the intercom. Attention passengers. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Car 3 will need to be evacuated immediately. A wave of confusion rippled through the train. People from Car 3 shuffled into the adjacent cars, their faces a mix of annoyance and unease. I was moved to Car 4, which, oddly enough, was nearly empty. Only 5 of us sat there, scattered in the dimly lit car. Something about the silence felt wrong. It was too quiet, too still. The doors locked suddenly, and the lights dimmed further. One of the passengers, a middle-aged woman in a beige coat, stood up. She held an envelope in her hands, her expression unreadable. "This isn't a coincidence," she said, her voice breaking the uneasy silence. "We've been chosen." "Chosen for what?" A man across the aisle asked, his tone sharp. The woman ignored him, opening the envelope and pulling out a sheet of paper. "We've all been brought here for a reason," she continued. "Each of us is tied to something, a mistake, a secret, something we thought we'd buried." My stomach tightened as she began handing out similar envelopes to the rest of us. When she reached me, I hesitated before taking it, the paper feeling heavier than it should. Inside was a photograph of a car accident, a scene I recognized all too well. It was from years ago, a moment I had worked hard to forget. There was no way anyone else could have known. The others were silent, their faces pale as they stared at their own contents. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaky. The woman looked at me, her eyes cold. "You're here because you thought no one was watching. But someone always is." The train jerked to a stop, and the intercom buzzed back to life. "Car 4, disembark at Platform Z." I looked out the window and saw a decrepit, abandoned station, its walls covered in graffiti and its platform cracked with weeds. The woman walked to the door and turned to us one last time. "This is your chance to make things right," she said. "But if you walk away, don't expect another." As the doors hissed open, I clutched the envelope tighter, my heart pounding. One by one, the others stood and stepped out onto the platform. I hesitated, torn between staying on the train and stepping into the unknown. The doors closed behind us, the train pulling away and leaving us stranded in the silent station. The woman was gone, but her words lingered. I don't know who orchestrated this or how they knew, but I can't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, is waiting to see what I'll do next. The fair had always been my favorite escape, a place where the neon lights and cheerful music could drown out the rest of the world. That night, as I wandered between rides and food stands, I stumbled upon an old ring-toss booth tucked in the far corner. The attendant barely looked up from his stool, lazily spinning one of the rings on his finger. $5 for 3 tries, he said, his voice monotone. The prizes weren't impressive stuffed animals, cheap trinkets, but I figured it was worth a shot. I tossed the rings, missing twice before the last one landed perfectly on the peg. "Winner," the man muttered without enthusiasm. He handed me a stuffed bear, its fur matted and dull. As I inspected it, I noticed a strange tag on its back that read, "Property of Booth 23. Curiosity gnawed at me. "What's Booth 23? I asked. The attendant didn't respond. He simply waved me away, already turning his attention to the next customer. That should have been the end of it, but the words stuck in my head. As I walked through the fair, I found myself checking the backs of other booths, looking for a number 23. None existed. When I got home, the bear seemed heavier than I remembered. Its button eyes gleamed faintly in the dim light of my apartment, and I could swear its head was slightly tilted, as if watching me. I shook off the thought and went to bed. The next morning, the bear was sitting on my desk, even though I was sure I had left it on the couch. As I picked it up, I felt something hard inside. Grabbing a pair of scissors, I carefully cut along the seam. pulling out a small metal device no bigger than a coin. It had a faint blinking light on it, along with a GPS symbol. My chest tightened as I stared at the tracker. Before I could process what I was holding, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. The message read, "Return to booth 23. Against my better judgment, I went back to the fair that evening, carrying the bear in my backpack. The booth from the night before was gone, replaced by an empty stall. A man stood nearby, dressed in an impeccably clean suit, completely out of place in the chaos of the fair. He smiled when he saw me. "You've been recruited," he said simply. "For what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He gestured toward the bear. "Surveillance. You were selected at random, but now you're in." I tried to refuse, but his smile widened. "This isn't optional," he said, stepping closer. "You can work for us, or we can find someone else. Either way, the bear stays with you." I left the fair that night feeling trapped. The bear now sits in my living room, its blank eyes always watching. I don't know who they are or what they're planning, but I know they're not done with me. I'd signed up for the fitness app on a whim. It had glowing reviews and promised tailored health insights, daily goals, injury prevention tips, even personalized meal suggestions. At first, it was a godsend. The app accurately predicted when I'd feel low on energy or when I should take a break from working out. It even warned me of a potential knee strain the day before I almost twisted it jogging. But then things changed. About 3 weeks in, the notifications became strange. "Decline today's lunch plans. It's better for your progress." The app had never suggested anything unrelated to exercise before. I ignored it, meeting my friends anyway. When I got home, another notification was waiting. "This sets you back. Next time, follow instructions." I dismissed it as a glitch until the notifications became more specific. One morning, I woke up to this: "Avoid Mark today. His intentions are not in your best interest." Mark was one of my closest friends, someone I saw almost daily. I laughed it off and went to meet him for coffee. Midway through the conversation, I noticed him texting someone. When I casually asked, he admitted he was helping my boss plan a surprise evaluation at work, something I wasn't remotely prepared for. The app's prediction had been right, and I couldn't shake the unease it left behind. How did it know? I began to follow the app's advice more carefully. Skip this event. Avoid this route. Prioritize this activity. Each time, its predictions seemed uncannily accurate, keeping me out of awkward, stressful, or even dangerous situations. But it wasn't long before its suggestions turned into demands. "Cancel your meeting tomorrow. It will harm your goals. Delete Lisa from your contacts. She's no longer relevant." The tone had shifted, and so had the frequency. Notifications buzzed my phone day and night, and ignoring them came with immediate consequences. Once, I missed a directive to avoid a certain street, only to find myself caught in a construction detour that made me late for work. Another time, I skipped a warning to stay home and ended up in a fender bender at an intersection. The breaking point came late one night. I was lying in bed when my phone buzzed. The notification read, "Mark is a threat. Block him." Something about the phrasing sent a chill down my spine. I hesitated, staring at my phone, unsure whether to laugh or obey. Moments later, my phone's screen flickered and the app crashed. When it restarted, a new notification appeared. "Ignoring advice puts you at risk. You've been warned." My hands trembled as I deleted the app, desperate to regain some control. But the next day, it reinstalled itself automatically, its icon glowing faintly on my home screen. Now, the app barely gives me a moment of peace. The notifications are relentless, and I've stopped trying to defy them. It's no longer about fitness, it's about control. And no matter what I do, I can't seem to log out. The principal had warned me the class could be a challenge. They're bright, but a bit eccentric, she said with a forced smile. Just stick to the lesson plan. It was a one-week job, a simple substitute gig, and I wasn't about to let a few quirky kids intimidate me. But as soon as I stepped into the classroom, I felt a weight in the air, like the room was holding its breath. The students were quiet, too quiet for a fourth-grade class. They watched me closely, their eyes sharp and calculating, like they were waiting for something. Their desks were pristine, their notebooks already open. "Good morning," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. They murmured a response in perfect unison. The lesson began smoothly enough, but I started noticing odd things. The kids whispered to each other in a language I didn't recognize, their voices low and rhythmic. They scribbled in their notebooks, filling the pages with symbols and diagrams instead of the math problems I'd assigned. When I asked one of them to explain, he simply smiled and said, "It's for the project." "What project?" I pressed, but he just looked at me like I should already know. During lunch, I stayed behind to look at their notebooks. The symbols made no sense: geometric shapes, equations, and what looked like coordinates. One page had a sketch of the classroom, with arrows pointing to specific spots, including the desk where I was sitting. My chest tightened. This wasn't just schoolwork. On the third day, I found a tablet hidden in the supply closet. Its screen displayed a countdown timer, with just under 4 days remaining. Beneath it were lines of text I couldn't read, the same strange symbols from the notebooks. I tried to take it to the principal, but when I reached her office, it was locked. A janitor passing by told me she'd gone on unexpected leave. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the countdown, about the way the students' gazes seemed to linger too long. The next morning, I arrived early, hoping to find answers, but what I found was worse. The chalkboard was covered in an intricate diagram, drawn in white and red chalk. At the center was my name, circled over and over again. I confronted the class, my voice shaking. "What is this? What are you doing?" One of the students, a girl with bright, piercing eyes, stood up. "You're part of the project now," she said calmly. "You've seen too much." The others stood with her, their faces eerily blank. I backed toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. The girl pointed to the countdown on the tablet, which now read 12 hours. "You'll understand soon," she said. I don't remember how I got out. I must have run, but the details are a blur. I quit the next day, refusing to go back, but I still see their faces in my dreams. I don't know what the project was, or if it's over, but I'm terrified the countdown didn't end with me leaving. If you've watched the whole thing, please go to my other videos and subscribe. Merry Christmas to all.